like to thank everybody also. The story kind of speaks for itself about what my Uncle Joe and my father did. As Roger said, we listened to these stories, and for a long time there was really no validation for these stories other than your old man telling you stories. But as time went on and they became recognized for the things that they did, it gave us, I guess, a bit of happiness for them. As Bill was saying, in Glendale at the time, they were not really dealt with or celebrated for their accomplishments. The trophies, the state trophies came home, but the state trophies were never displayed. They were stored in the basement of the school, and they stayed there for quite a few years until they closed the X9 school down. So they didn't know what to do with the trophies. I guess they could have displayed them, but they decided to give them to my dad and my uncle, figure out what they're going to do with them. So for years, in our house, we had the state trophy on the mantle. And 6 months after that, it would go back to Roger's house, and it would stay there, and for years it would go back and forth and back and forth. Kind of difficult for them, I think. They, it was the 30s and times were different, but our fathers never really showed any bitterness to the fact of the way they were treated within the community. And as time went on and the recognition came, I think they were starting to be relieved somewhat that you all knew who they were. They knew within themselves who they were, but when you accomplish something like that, everybody wants a pat on the back, and they never received it as a youth. So all this recognition, Buddy LaRosa and the High School Hall of Fame and all that was good, and I think it finally gave them that validation of what we did. And I'm going to finish in a minute, but I'm my father's son, and so he also was fast, but he used to talk a lot too. So, but all these things came, like I said, came to pass with all the admiration, that they received from the public. They named a park after them. It was great. But the trophies, at the time of the dedication of the park, I think my Uncle Joe was gone by then, but there was nothing we could do with those. I mean, the village of Glendale, they're going to name a park, might as well take the trophies back. So they finally accepted the trophies, and they're now on display in the village of Glendale for all the people. They lived in Glendale, and they ran for Glendale, and that's all they ever wanted. So, thank you.
The inductions that remain are those are the people who were able to be with us tonight, and we will do this in alphabetical order. Our first athlete being honored tonight is Doug Bockenstette, and personally speaking, I've enjoyed watching you compete as an opposing coach, and I really didn't like the fact that you always beat my guys, but that's why you're here and they are not. So that's pretty cool. Pretty cool. So our first athlete to be honored is Doug Bockenstette, and he will be presented by Frank Russo. Come on up, Frank. You're still young. Just jump over those chairs. This microphone is doing better.
All right, good evening. From the fall of 1990 to the spring of 1994, I had the privilege to coach Doug. What separated and elevated Doug from his competitors were all the intangibles as coaches that we preach to our guys on a day-to-day basis. Dedication, determination, focus, and discipline. But Doug had several values and traits that are rare in athletes, but necessary to reach the pinnacle of high school sports, which are to win a state title and then to go on to Foot Locker and national championships. He symbolized our community values with his blue-collar work ethic, high threshold for pain, and relentless competitive spirit to be the best. Here were just a few memories and examples. One is I never really recall Doug ever missing practice but once in his 4 years. And that was for a trip to the doctor to get a cortisone shot in his knee. He'd be at practice the next day. In the fall of his senior year, during the week of the state meet, Doug came down with a serious cough and cold. Again, day in, day out, he was coughing, hacking, through the night actually, up through the day of the state meet. And he was facing the two-time All-American Jason Rexing from Pickerington, who had actually beaten Doug the year before. But Doug had faced Jason just several weeks prior at the Les Eisenhardt Invitational and outkicked Jason in the last 200 meters. So Doug knew he faced one of the best not only in the state, but also in the country. And so what Doug had done is he never allowed his sickness nor to become an excuse or a distraction when he was preparing for his race. He ran a textbook race that Saturday and sat on Rexing for nearly the entire race until he re-entered Scioto Downs and nailed him with his explosive kick. Doug was a true role model and a champion. You never really hear him talk about himself, what he had ever achieved. But only the attention that he would ever bring to himself would be on race day. So his actions actually spoke louder than his words. Today, Doug is really an icon over at LaSalle High School. His 1994 state championship was our first in school history. And actually during that time, it was when the state had transitioned over to a two-day 3,200 meter relay on that Friday. So Doug had an opportunity to triple in the state championship. He ran 154 on that Friday, anchoring our 3,200 meter relay to finish 5th overall in the state meet. Bob Heim, who's a LaSalle grad, came up, never forget, we were walking into the stadium and said, you guys got a shot to win the state title if Doug wins both the 16 and the 32. Well, Doug, it was 100 degrees on the track that day, and Doug went out in his first race, which was the 1,600 meter run, and ran 4:10. Spent just a few minutes out, was awarded the medal at the stand, went underneath, was very focused, had a cold, his mom I know got a cold towel, put it around his neck, sat there for about 15 minutes, went back out and warmed up. And it was interesting because Jason Rexing, who he had defeated in the cross-country state championship, had ended up opting out of the 1,600 to be fresh. So Jason, who was a two-time All-American, had never won a state title. Jason's goal was to win the state championship in the 3,200, but he sat and watched Doug run the 1,600, and again, he had a signature kick the last 200 meters in the 1,600. So Doug enters the 3,200, sits on Jason for 6 laps, and then takes off and takes a nod, looks over at him, and the last 200 meters he has an explosive 200 meter kick and sets the state record in the 3,200, running 9:07. And that was to lead our team, our school, to the first state championship. And again, it's one thing to win a state title. And there's many, many people who have done that. There's a special person that can take a team, put them on their back, and actually a community and a school, and bring it to a level that it's never done, and to win a team state title. And it was interesting, longtime legendary coach Chris Summerlot, I'll never forget, walked up, he had a big smile on his face and said, "You did it." He said, "I never thought I'd see a team ever win a state championship with distance runners, with a team predominantly of distance runners." And so Doug basically made the impossible possible. And as a result of that, he had our coaches and our school believing we could win. And again, we are the smallest school in the GCL, which is a hyper-competitive league. And 1 year later, our team wins the state basketball championship. So he changed the culture of our entire school and our community, which is incredible for a student to do that. But again, Doug was one of actions, and he made us believe. And the interesting thing about the state track championships that I'll never forget is I was walking underneath the stands. Dad looked over at me and said, "Yeah, Doug was baling hay this week and tending to his horses." So his father Doug never gave up his responsibilities at home. Never looked the other way and said, "Hey, I got to rest my legs." But it was that work ethic, that determination that actually his parents had ingrained in him that he brought to the track and again set a tremendous example for our program. And from there, we had several other athletes that would follow in his footsteps that would become All-Americans as well. And finally, it was an interesting race. It was shortly after the state championship, his senior year, Doug ran in the junior nationals. And now he's not facing, athletes from St. X or from, a Mentor or St. Ignatius, some of those particular types of schools. But now he's looking over and he's running against guys from University of Alabama, Stanford, and all over the country. Accomplished freshmen, elite collegiate runners. And Doug says to me right before the race, I said, "How do you feel?" He goes, "My back is killing me." And he went out for 10 laps and ran right with the all Pac-10 Greg Jimerson from Stanford, who finished 6th overall in the Pac-10 for 10 laps. Now Doug, this was his first 5,000 meters ever on the track. And Doug went on to run the fastest time in the nation that year at 14:44. Really, all of this was just an example of just how determined, how competitive, and really how tough Doug was. And so, again, he still is a much talked about athlete at LaSalle High School. And again, is a generation later, our guys are still trying to train the same way he did, with just a punishing, day-to-day, grueling tempo that he would go out and push the rest of his team, not only himself, but the rest of the team along. So it gives me great honor to introduce Doug Bockenstette.